Well, and a pleasure to welcome back to the show Andrew Zimmern, who many of you know for his TV shows that he creates and hosts about food. He's also the founder and CEO of Passport Hospitality, a restaurant and food service development company. Andrew, great to have you back with us. And I guess let's start with where you're seeing the restaurant industry right now, 9 months into this pandemic.
Falling apart. So many restaurants are used to over the years pivoting, robbing Peter to pay Paul, playing the seasonal game, juggling menus and employees and costs. They're extremely creative entrepreneurs. Independent restaurants are some of the most fascinating business people that I know. You saw upticks during the summer in business as they were able to expand to outdoor cafes, and people were getting used to-go meals, delivery meals, all kinds of different ways that restaurants were finding a way to ring the cash register. But as summer turned to fall and winter is now upon us, we see restaurants all across the country essentially running out of options. I think a lot are playing the game of trying to stay open through December when people are buying gift cards and things like that. And I think you're going to see another huge wave of closures come January unless Congress finds a way to pass the Restaurants Act over the next week or so.
Yeah, so let's talk about that specifically because this is kind of a theme that we've seen play out here in the United States over the last several months is the inability to get a lot of funding elements forward to help a lot of different people, specifically with the Restaurant Act. Tell us what you would like to see occur to help out this entire industry.
Well, it's really simple. I think the biggest piece of the puzzle that people don't understand is how actually big the restaurant industry is. It's just independent restaurants alone are $1 trillion plus industry, 11 to 13 million employees, still the majority of people on unemployment. 93, 94% of income passes through them back into the communities, holder of trust taxes, a big piece of the tourism component in this country from an economic standpoint. And of course, the purchasers of so much stuff that is that supply chain that we talk about all the time. So if this industry that represents about 4.5, 4.75% of GDP goes under, has an extinction event like I predict will happen if the Restaurants Act does not pass, we're going to see an economic tragedy occur that will impact all Americans. And I think people fail to understand collectively how big the independent restaurant industry is. Now, the Restaurants Act, which is a $120 billion relief package, does a lot of things for restaurants. People can go to www.saverestaurants.com and see the Restaurants Act there and what it really represents. But it's essentially a 12-month backstop that allows these restaurants to survive. Now, why would we give independent relief to one business entity, one business pillar in our system? Well, the reason is that it saves us money. If restaurants go under, if independent restaurants suffer an extinction event, it will cost America $270 billion over the next year. Now, that's not some figure that I've plucked out of thin air. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, OMB, McKinsey, all these different people who study this stuff have guaranteed it because the numbers are there. It's not that we shouldn't do it, it's that we can't afford not to, and it's
Right.
become a bit of a political football.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a forward-thinking process that needs to occur of what the potential impacts are 6, 12, 18 months down the road, instead of just thinking about the pain that a lot of these restaurant owners are in right at this particular moment.
Yeah, this is something that's affecting our neighbors and loved ones. It affects Main Street. People think of the small little restaurant as being the anomaly. That's actually the majority of independent restaurants. People think of independent restaurants as, the fancy places that celebrity chefs own that seem to be, immune from, economic ravages, that, you've got, one version of it in your hometown and another in Las Vegas, and everyone is sitting on piles of cash. That's an
Yeah.
absolute piece of mythology. And the tragedy of this is that the restaurants, the independent restaurants represent to such a great extent decades of savings and investment from families and individuals into a small economic engine that just keeps chugging along, essentially breaking even.
Yeah.
Look, the restaurant industry was brittle and fragile before we came into COVID, but shutting us down for the 10 months that we've been shut down, basically since March, operating at far less percentage of capacity than we ever would have imagined could be economically tenable, is not a solution. We need the Restaurants Act passed. It is the smartest thing that the U.S. government could do. And for those of us who've lived and breathed in this, it's like we see the iceberg and we're on the Titanic and we're screaming at people, turn the darn boat. It's the
Yeah.
simplest thing in the whole world. Pass the Restaurants Act.
How has this period of time made you think differently about the issue of risk? Because we've asked this of so many CEOs over the last 9 months. And obviously, from business to business, the reaction may differ a little bit. But when you think about your operations, whether it be restaurants that you're involved with, TV shows that you're involved with, obviously the philanthropic efforts, has this changed your philosophy about risk?
It has slightly in the sense that I think that we have to take a more careful long-term approach as we enter into what is clearly now, if the rose-colored glasses weren't off 10 years ago, they should be off now, that we
Yeah,
live in a much more volatile world. We talk about things like the viral pandemic. We also have a cultural pandemic that has
yeah,
impacted so many businesses in America. And quite frankly, the climate crisis that we're in globally, I think as I traveled around the world, what would happen if we went into that double drought scenario that so many agricultural forecasters predict is just a matter of time before it happens? Weather events that pile one on top of another and don't allow us to catch up for a year. It's been about 300 days since that first case of COVID in the United States, and we've seen needles go into arms over in the UK, and we know that there's a vote today for the executive use of the vaccines. Um, this has just been 1 year in time that has damaged our economy for what I believe will be another 18 months before that we're able to recover. And I think we just have to be a lot more prudent about the choices we make and start to create a more stable and robust system. I mentioned before, restaurants were very brittle prior
yeah.
to COVID. I wish we had been able to take our industry apart brick by brick and build it back to one that was a little more healthy economically. COVID blew it down. And I think the one opportunity that we have now, as we do enter the next couple of years, as restaurants come back, and a percentage will, I pray that 75 and 80% don't disappear. But if it does, over the next 5 to 10 years, we will see people want to feed other people in a publicly available environment. I mean, we are going to
Yeah.
have restaurants at some point in the future, but I think we need to do so in a way that's more economically sound to prevent these kinds of disastrous effects from having the ravages that we've seen. It's really simple. If we want Main Street to exist, we have to backstop small businesses. Restaurants are a big part of that, and that means the Restaurants Act needs to pass.
Hey, so I was going to say, give you the last minute here to make your pitch to Congress right now, and exactly why this needs to occur. Obviously, you've laid out a lot of these important reasons why, but the time is now, especially considering we're going into
It
winter and Christmas and such.
It really is. I mean, you just take a look at, one pillar of this. It's $1 trillion industry on its own, multiple trillions of dollars with the supply chain. But think of the unemployment impact. If we have 11 to 13 million people and 80% of them go on unemployment and or stay on unemployment, because we're still the largest number of unemployed people in America, the damage is going to be long term. Restaurants employ very special populations: first-time job seekers, last-time job seekers, immigrants, largest employer of single moms, single dads, returning citizens from jails and institutions. These are not people who find it easy to go get another job. I
Yeah.
think we are in for a real economic tragedy if the Restaurants Act does not pass. And I would encourage people to go to saverestaurants.com and urge lawmakers, you can do it from a very simple widget on the website, to pass the Restaurants Act and learn more about it. Spread the awareness. We need people talking about
Yeah.
this. We can't be saving small industries in America because they're favorites on Capitol Capitol Hill and ignore something that's almost 5% of the American GDP. Just doesn't make
Yeah.
sense.